Don't tell me you invited him to the wedding, a guest whispered as the bride ran to embrace a homeless man entering the church. People turned their heads, some scoffed, others looked away, but she didn't care, because that man, the one they called a stranger, had once shown her what dignity looked like in silence, what happens when kindness is repaid with honor. And just as the whispers reached their loudest, the door swung open, 12 Marines in full dress uniform stepped inside, and what they did next left the entire church breathless. Welcome to Graceful Valor Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. You get to know a lot about a person when you work beside them before sunrise, especially in a bakery. My name is Martha Ellison. I've been rolling dough and brewing coffee at Morning Light Bakery in Rockford, North Carolina, for almost 20 years, long enough to know which customers steal extra jam packets and which coworkers keep a quiet kind of goodness tucked inside them like a secret. Grace Whitmore was one of those people. She came to us just after her 24th birthday, young, soft-spoken, hands-made. For pastries, never late, never loud, just steady. Grace didn't talk much about herself, but you could tell she carried something heavy and carried it well. Most mornings I'd arrive by 4:45 a.m. Grace was always there before me. She'd unlock the side door, turn on the old humming lights, and start the ovens while the rest of Rockford was still asleep. You could find her at the prep table, flower on her arms, singing under her breath the same gentle rhythm every day. But it wasn't the singing that caught my eye. It was what she did right after pulling the first batch from the oven. She'd set one croissant aside, always the best shaped one, wrap it in parchment, then pour a black coffee into a foam cup, no cream, no sugar, just plain. Then she'd disappear out the back door for exactly 3 minutes. I didn't ask at first, figured it was a break, or maybe she just liked the morning air, but after a while, curiosity got the better of me, so I followed quietly. Out behind the bakery, there's an old bus stop bench, doesn't get much traffic, just sits near the chain link fence, half covered in ivy. That's where I saw him, an older man, probably in his 70s, silver hair, worn out coat, same seat every day. Just before dawn, he never begged, never spoke, just sat there like a statue made of stories no one had time to ask about. Grace didn't say a word either. She'd leave the pastry and coffee on the far end of the bench, no fanfare, no thanks expected. Then she'd come back in, wash her hands, and start her day like nothing happened. This went on for years. I asked her once, Grace, you know that fella out there? She just shook her head. Not really, she said, but he's there and I've got more than I need. That was it. No sermon, no spotlight, just decency. Some of the girls started to notice. You know how places like ours get a whisper here, a smirk there. Is she feeding that guy again? Why doesn't she just donate to a shelter or something? The new manager, Troy, pulled her into the office one day, said something about customer perception and brand image. Grace nodded through the whole conversation, said, I understand, in that polite way she always did. The next morning, she came in 15 minutes earlier than usual, and she kept doing it. Same croissant, same coffee, same bench, just earlier, before anyone could see it except I saw, because I made it a point to, and I started noticing other things, too, like how the man never touched the food until she was gone, or how some mornings he'd leave the napkin folded neatly like a thank you in origami. Then one day in the middle of December, the rain came, not a drizzle, not a storm, just that steady, bone-soaking rain that makes everything feel heavier than it already is. I was wiping down the front counter when Grace came in and soaked through her coat. She didn't complain, just changed her shoes and went to work. At 5:15, she grabbed the same pastry, poured the same coffee, and stepped into that freezing rain like it owed her nothing. When she came back, she was holding something, a napkin, but this time, it wasn't blank. I watched as she stared at it for a long moment, eyes glassy, but not spilling. Then she folded it carefully and tucked it into her wallet like it was more valuable than a paycheck. Later that morning, when the rush had died down, I asked her gently, what did it say? She hesitated, looked around to make sure no one else was listening, then she whispered, thank you for seeing me as a person. That's all it said, just that. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. I just walked back to the dish pit and let the warm water hide the tears in my eyes, because in a world full of people looking for credit, Grace had been quietly giving it away every single morning for 6 straight years. She didn't know his name, she didn't ask his story, she just gave, and now for the first time, he had given something back, a note, a message, a moment. That was when I stopped seeing Grace as just a girl with good manners and a perfect croissant recipe. That was the day I realized she wasn't feeding a stranger, she was seeing him, and in doing so, she reminded the rest of us what it means to show up for someone no one else sees, not once, not loudly, but again and again. Can a daily croissant reveal a hidden hero? That was the beginning. The rest, the letter, the wedding, the uniforms, all of that came later. But for me, the story started with a paper cup and a croissant on a bench out back, and the quiet girl who never asked for anything in return. There's a quiet kind of love you only see in small towns, and there's a quieter kind of man who carries it. Daniel Rhodes was one of those men, a firefighter in Rockford, solid, dependable, patient in ways most people only pretend to be. He wasn't flashy, he didn't make speeches or take up space, but the way he looked at Grace Whitmore, like she was the steady center of his world, well, that said more than any bouquet of roses ever could. They got engaged on a Wednesday. I remember because Grace showed up to the bakery the next morning with flour on her cheek and a diamond on her finger and still clocked in 5 minutes early. "Congratulations," I whispered, giving her a little side hug. She smiled, soft and glowing, then pulled on her apron like it was any other day. Grace never changed who she was, not for attention, not for approval, not even for love. Daniel understood that. He didn't just know about the man on the bench behind the bakery, he respected it. Said once, "She feeds people the way some folks pray, quietly. And like it means something." I liked him instantly. The months rolled on. Cake orders were placed, invitations were stamped, the bakery buzzed with talk of Grace's big day, but Grace, true to form, never made a fuss. Then, 2 days before the wedding, something strange happened. I was stacking boxes of cinnamon rolls when she came in from the front office holding a cream-colored envelope, no return address, no postage, just her name written in narrow, deliberate handwriting. "Grace Whitmore?" I asked. "Something from the caterer?" She shook her head slowly. "It was hand delivered." She opened it right there at the counter. I watched her eyes scan the short message inside, no expression, just that quiet stillness she wore like a second skin. She handed me the card. It read, "I will come tomorrow, not for cake, but to honor a debt." That's all it said, no signature, no explanation, just those words hanging heavy between us. Grace didn't say much after that, just folded the card, slipped it into her coat pocket, and went back to kneading dough. But something had shifted, and I had a feeling this wedding wouldn't unfold the way people expected. The morning of the ceremony was crisp and clear, sunlight spilled through the stained glass of St. Luke's Church like gold poured from heaven. I arrived early, clutching the cake box like it held sacred treasure, the pews filled with familiar faces, neighbors, firefighters, bakery customers, even the mayor's wife in a dress 2 sizes too tight. Grace was in the bridal room, calm as ever. Her dress was simple, ivory lace, long sleeves, the kind of gown that whispered instead of shouted. I peeked in and said, "Need anything?" She smiled, just a moment to breathe. Down in the vestibule, guests murmured, shifting in their seats. The music was about to start when the church doors creaked open, and in walked a man no one recognized, older, thin, his shoulders a bit stooped, but his posture still held dignity. He wore a charcoal gray suit, dated but neatly pressed, his shoes were shined, though the soles had seen better years, his silver hair was combed carefully, and in his hand he clutched a plain felt hat. He stood near the back, unsure for a moment, scanning the space like someone searching for permission to exist. The room grew quiet, and then came the whispers. Who invited him? Is he lost? Is he here for the free food? Someone chuckled, another rolled their eyes, but before anything else could be said, Grace appeared at the top of the aisle. She hadn't waited for her cue, she hadn't waited for the music, she simply stepped out, veil in hand, dress brushing the tile, and walked toward him like nothing else in the world mattered. I remember the way her heels echoed through the silence. I remember how Daniel, standing up front with the pastor, didn't flinch, he just watched. Grace reached the man and without hesitation wrapped her arms around him, tears welled in her eyes, threatening to smudge her perfectly done makeup. She whispered, barely audible to the nearest row, "I remember your eyes the first morning in 2017. He smiled, a smile that softened every line on his weathered face. "I remember every morning," he replied, "every pastry, every coffee. You treated me like a person when I barely felt like one." She took his arm, linked it with hers, and together they walked down the aisle. No one moved, no one spoke. The music started again, but softly this time, like even the organist knew something sacred had just taken place. Grace and the old man walked halfway up the aisle and paused. That's when it happened. The heavy church doors burst open behind them, not loudly, but with deliberate precision. 12 men stepped inside. Each one wore the full dress blues of the United States Marine Corps, white gloves, gold buttons, medals gleaming under the vaulted light. They marched forward in perfect formation, the echo of their boots steady and sure. When they reached the pews, they turned toward the center aisle and in one synchronized motion raised their hands in salute, not to the pastor, not to the groom, but to Grace. A wave of silence rippled through the crowd. One guest dropped a champagne glass, it shattered like punctuation to the moment. Even the pastor looked stunned. Captain Elijah Moore stepped forward from the formation, the nameplate gleamed on his chest. He stopped in front of Grace, snapped to attention, and said, his voice loud, clear, and reverent, "On behalf of Alpha Company, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, we are here to honor the woman who, without ever knowing it, sustained one of our own for 6 years." He turned slightly and gestured to the man at Grace's side. "This is Sergeant Franklin Wade, a Silver Star recipient, veteran of Fallujah, and the man who saved my life." No one spoke, not a whisper, not a breath, just that overwhelming stillness, the kind that only truth can bring. I looked at Daniel, then is still up front, still waiting. He caught Grace's eyes and smiled, then he nodded, an invitation, an approval, a vow of his own. She looked back at Sergeant Wade. "Would you walk me the rest of the way?" she asked softly. He nodded once, and together they moved forward, the air inside The church had shifted, not just quiet now, reverent, like every breath held weight, like every heartbeat was trying to understand what had just happened. Captain Elijah Moore, tall, composed, sharp-eyed beneath his dress cap, stepped toward the altar. He didn't need a microphone, his voice filled the space the way only conviction can. He stood before the congregation, before Grace and Franklin, and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, what you witnessed today is not a performance. It is a homecoming." He paused, let the words settle, then he turned toward the man standing at Grace's side. "This man, the one you've seen only as a stranger, or worse, as someone beneath notice, is Sergeant Franklin Wade." You could hear the gasp ripple through the room like wind through wheat. Captain Moore continued, "In 2004, during an ambush in Fallujah, Sergeant Wade saved 9 Marines, myself included, by dragging us through open fire after being wounded himself. He refused medical evacuation until every one of us was safe." His voice caught for half a second, just long enough for you to hear the history behind it. "He was awarded the Silver Star," Moore said, "but he never claimed it, never told a soul." He looked around the room. In 2016, after losing his wife and daughter in a car accident, Sergeant Wade withdrew from the world. He declined benefits, disappeared from records. He chose silence over ceremony. I looked at Grace then. She wasn't crying. Not in the dramatic movie scene kind of way, but her hands clutched her bouquet a little tighter, her chin lifted a little higher, because now she understood, and I think she always had. Captain Moore nodded to one of the Marines standing just behind him. The young man, maybe 22, fresh-faced and steady-handed, stepped forward with a polished wooden box. He placed it gently into Grace's hands. She opened it. Inside lay a silver star, clean, heavy, quiet in its meaning, and beside it, wait, a photograph, black and white, dusty with time, but clear enough to see. It showed Franklin, younger, blood on his uniform, carrying a wounded Marine across a rubble-strewn street, smoke behind them, chaos all around, and the wounded Marine, barely conscious, was none other than Captain Moore himself. You could feel the temperature drop when that photo passed hands. It wasn't a story anymore, it was proof. Grace held the photo like something sacred. Her fingers trembled, but not from fear, from recognition. She looked up at Franklin, and that's when he finally spoke. His voice wasn't loud. "It didn't need to be. You never asked me who I was," he said. "You never wanted my story or my history or my scars." He paused. "You just saw me. There it was, the truth of it, not dressed up, not wrapped in some grand speech, just honest and full." Grace nodded once, eyes locked with his. "And I saw you too," she whispered. "Every morning." Captain Moore turned back to the crowd. "Miss Whitmore did what so many of us forget to do. She gave dignity without demanding context, kindness without expecting credit. She showed up again and again." Then he swept his eyes over the pews, stopping on people who had whispered earlier, who had scoffed or rolled their eyes when Franklin first walked in. "And if you think that doesn't matter," he said, his voice cutting like glass, "ask any of the men still alive today because of Sergeant Wade." No one spoke, not the woman in pearls who had laughed behind her program, not the usher who had almost asked Franklin to leave, not even Troy, our bakery's new manager, who now looked like he wanted to crawl under a pew. But someone did speak. Up from the third row near the aisle, it was Megan, one of our morning bakers, shy girl, barely out of high school. Her voice trembled, but she stood tall. "We used to tease her," she said, motioning toward Grace, behind her back. "We thought it was weird giving food away for free." She swallowed hard, "But she's the best of us. We just didn't see it, and that broke something open." Another coworker stood, then another. Someone whispered, "I'm sorry," a man from the back said. "She bought those pastries with her own money." "I saw her," and one of our regular customers, a retired schoolteacher named Carl, cleared his throat and added softly, "She fed someone who saved the men that protect our country. I think that makes her more of a patriot than most of us." That's when Daniel, Grace's groom, her partner, the man who had waited patiently through all of this, stepped forward. He didn't look surprised, he looked proud. He took Grace's free hand, then turned to Franklin, and with all the steadiness in the world, he asked, "Sir, would you do me the honor of walking her the rest of the way?" Franklin looked stunned for a second, and then slowly, he nodded. He offered his arm again, and together, Grace on one side, Daniel on the other, they walked forward, no longer a bride walking alone, but a woman being honored by those she'd honored in silence for years. The rest of the ceremony, I won't lie, it was a blur. Vows were exchanged, tears were shed, even the pastor's voice cracked at one point. But what I remember most was what happened after the rings. The Marines, all 12 of them, lined the aisle again, not as a military tribute, not by request, but because they wanted to. One by one, they each shook Grace's hand, each whispered something, a thank you, a memory, a blessing, and every guest in that church knew this wasn't just a wedding, this was something deeper, a moment when a quiet life was finally seen for what it truly was, a kind of valor that never needed a uniform. Grace never came back to the bakery, not after the honeymoon, not after the headlines, not even for one last shift. She left her apron folded on the back hook, the same one she used for 6 years, her name tag still clipped to the collar. We didn't move it, didn't feel right to. She didn't leave because she was done baking, she left because she'd found something bigger to feed. A few weeks after the wedding, a letter showed up taped to the front window of Morning Light Bakery, written in Grace's handwriting, just one sentence. "Thank you for the years, I'll still be feeding people." Just from a different bench, and that's how we learned about Morning Bench. It wasn't a business, wasn't a non-profit, wasn't anything official really, just a quiet stretch of sidewalk on the edge of downtown, an old bench, cleaned, painted, and placed beneath a rusted tin awning. Beside it, a wooden table Grace's husband, Daniel, built by hand every morning from 6 to 8 o'clock. They served hot breakfast, no forms, no questions, no shame. If you were hungry, you were welcome. They used their wedding money to fund the first few months. Friends donated supplies, a retired vet brought them a second-hand coffee maker, an old grocer gave day-old bread. The rest they figured out as they went. Grace called it Morning Bench, but everyone else called it the place Grace built. There was no big sign, no banner, just a small wooden plaque nailed to the side of the bench. Every meal is a thank you, and that was it. Franklin never returned, not to the bench, not to Rockford, not even to the church where it all unfolded. At first, people assumed he had passed, but Grace knew better, because once a month, like clockwork, a postcard would arrive, no return address, just the postmark: Pittsburgh, Baltimore, El Paso, Boise, different towns, different states, but always the same message. Every breakfast is a salute. Thank you, Grace F. She kept every one of them in a shoebox, labeled it Mornings Worth Remembering. I saw it once when I dropped off a bag of flour. She didn't mention it, didn't explain, just rested her hand on the lid for a second, then went back to stirring batter. That was Grace. 1 year later, almost to the day, 12 men arrived at Morning Bench, not in uniform, just jeans, flannel, a few with ball caps pulled low, but I knew them the moment I saw them. The Marines, the same men who had walked into that church in perfect formation, who saluted her like she'd worn boots and held a rifle. Only this time, they came with aprons. They didn't make an announcement, didn't schedule anything. They just showed up on a Saturday morning saying, "We're here to help," and help they did. One man washed dishes, one chopped onions, one spent the whole morning quietly wiping down the table every time someone finished a plate. When someone asked, "Why are you here?" the youngest among them, barely 30, said, "Because she never left anyone behind, neither will we." They came back the next weekend, and the one after that, started rotating shifts, quiet, humbled, precise. You could tell they missed structure, but more than that, you could tell they needed to serve again, only now in a different way. Some mornings at Morning Bench, you'd see men with medals tucked into worn jackets. Other days, you'd see a teenage girl bringing her granddad for coffee because he hadn't smiled in months. One woman came every Friday just to sit and listen to the stories, not to interrupt, not to document, just to listen. Veterans found each other there, but more than that, they found a place where they weren't invisible anymore. And Grace, she stayed the same. Still wore that simple braid, still made the coffee just a little too strong, still handed out croissants like they were holy, and every now and then, if you caught her between the rush, you'd see her pause by the bench, fingers grazing the plaque, eyes scanning the street like maybe, just maybe, Franklin might appear around the corner again. He never did, but the bench always had someone on it. A few months ago, a news crew tried to do a segment on the place. Grace turned them away, politely said, "You can interview the people who eat here, but I'm not." The story, they left, confused, frustrated, but I wasn't, because some people feed for the spotlight. Grace Whitmore fed for the soul. Now and then, when I walk past the bakery, I glance at the back door. It's still got the dent from when the flour rack fell over in 2018, still creaks in the rain, but the bench behind it, the one where Franklin used to sit, empty. Sometimes folks ask me why no one else uses it. I tell them, because it's not about the bench, it's about being seen, and that bench already did its job. It reminded a quiet girl that her small daily kindness mattered. It reminded a forgotten soldier that his life still held meaning, and it reminded a town full of skeptics that not every medal is made of metal. I still visit Morning Bench on Thursdays. I don't volunteer, I don't hand out toast, I just sit, and I watch the way Grace nods to each person like she remembers them from 100 lifetimes ago. Watch how Daniel refills cups before they're even empty, and how the Marines, scattered among the crowd, still stand a little straighter when they see her, because they remember. We all do. Some days I think about that first note Franklin left, "Thank you for seeing me as a person," and I realize maybe that's all any of us wanted, to be seen, not judged, not saved, just noticed. In Grace, she saw him before the uniform, before the salute, before the silver star. She saw the man, and because of that, the world shifted, not loudly, not quickly, but permanently. There's a saying I've heard from the veterans: not every hero wears a uniform, and now I know something else is just as true. Not every soldier walks into war with a weapon. Some just carry coffee and a croissant. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today someone isn't going hungry, and sometimes that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.